The Quarantine Sessions podcast with Jacob.
Thank you, Dea, for joining me today. It's a real pleasure to be speaking with you. You are a priestess, a self proclaimed priestess, and I'll allow you to introduce yourself. And if you could just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, where you find yourself in the world, and what it means to be a priestess.
Mm-hmm. Of course. Hi. Thank you so much for having me on this call. And yeah, I'm not actually self-proclaimed. I'm initiated.
Okay,
So I work
sorry.
with different bodies of initiation, and I'm a hereditary priestess. So I come from a family lineage who works with the goddess Isis for many generations back. I'm not necessarily going to go into that story because it's a long one. Um, but I'm also a mystic. I'm also a teacher. So right now, especially in this year or so, how the world changed. Mostly, what I've been doing is just teaching, sharing. I have a PhD in mythology and occult studies. So most of my teaching is woven around my understanding of mysticism, mythology, and the occult.
Beautiful. Awesome.
And the mission's just been for me to share information that is out there but perhaps misunderstood, a little bit distorted, sometimes just lost in translation, and sometimes just not known or understood, to the extent of really just like reintroducing certain traditions, certain understandings that we've lost throughout time, or maybe the ones like, as we will talk about, sex magic that is popular right now, but not in a way it has been practiced in originally in Egypt and Sumeria and in the ancient times. So my work really, even as a priestess, is to go back to the origin and bring as much of as possible, of course, that information back to us today. As they say, the future have ancient origins, right? So we're creating with substance. We can't just create with airy fairiness. We need substance. We need information. Um, and as a priestess, I work with mostly women, sometimes men too, and train them on a priestess path, and teach them about mysticism, sexual magic, blood magic, serpentine traditions, because that's part of my family lineage, and teach them about understanding and studying symbolism that is present around us all the time. So right now I'm in Avalon, UK, or Glastonbury, UK, if you want the common name for it. And here, this is a beautiful, powerful place that connects a lot of mythology and mysticism, and a lot of roads lead to Avalon, so to speak. So it's a very beautiful place to do this work because it's very supporting, from spirit and also from the community here.
Amazing. Yeah, thanks so much for being here. I'm curious about your path as an Isis priestess, and how much is preserved from ancient Egypt, and how much of it comes directly from that source, and how much of it is like repaired or fabricated for the modern era. I know that within Magic, for example, a lot of what the work that people who are in the Order of the Golden Dawn and Aleister Crowley and people like that were doing is that they were visiting museums and even archaeological sites, and trying to decipher ancient Egyptian uh, mythologies and magic. And a lot of people who I've spoken to who have been initiated into Kemetic paths have said that they actually got it pretty wrong. But they were doing the best that they could at the time, given what was available to them. I know that a lot of the original information of that was available in ancient Egypt for magicians, for priestesses, things like that, has been lost. And there have been certain organizations that have actively tried to stifle that from continuing. So I'm just curious, in regards to your practice and the path that you follow, how much of that is what you might say is authentic?
Mhm.
And is that even important if it's effective?
That's a good questions. So what you said, especially about the Golden Dawn and Aleister Crowley, is all true. Obviously, they were working with what they had, and what they had was in museums salvaged from, well, stolen. Let's just be correct, stolen from Egypt. And also they viewed those materials through their very Western modern perception, right? So even their translations of hieroglyphics, which I also do, I translate hieroglyphics, and I speak Magick and I speak Coptic. Well, speak as much as it's possible to speak in a sort of ritual connotation, of course. They just had their masculine Western minds to translate all those scriptures, and I think they've done a brilliant job with it. But yes, they got a lot of things wrong. I have a very simple answer to your questions. The Library of Alexandria is lost, and we have lost a lot of the information from ancient Egypt, but we haven't lost the Ptolemaic Egypt information, because the Ptolemaic pharaohs were Greek, and they were very pristine and specific on preserving information. And so when we look at the Greco-Roman era, a lot of the teachings that are brought forward are still Egyptian. They just don't necessarily claim that origin directly, but it's very clear from the practices and the stories and the understandings. Now, granted, distortions happen because obviously that's a Greco-Roman understanding of the same teachings, but they definitely preserved a lot of medicine. And there's a lot of 3 specific Greek philosophers who were initiated and studied in the Egyptian temples. So their work, maybe we can add a link to somewhere on your podcast for those for these specific philosophers. Their work is going really, their life work is going in depth into Egyptian traditions. Now, my family tradition that I have grew up in, you can call it a cult if you like, is really working with the Romanized Isis. So the practices, the traditions, the formulas, the understanding of the cosmos is coming from the Roman Isis, because in Egypt, the name of Isis is actually Iset or Ast. Right? So the word Isis is not even Egyptian. It's really is the Romanized word, and that is the material that sort of was always available for me and presented to me. And as I've started studying mythology and occultism, I started peeling the layers off and going a lot deeper than what was available for me naturally then, as a young student. There is still information out there. There's a lot we haven't found. And even now, granted you get access to some of the things in Egypt that are available, you can dig deeper. So there's still things we can discover and find, but no, we've lost a lot of the original material. And how relevant it is, I think it has a relevance from a perspective of functionality. I think the closer you get to the original practice in terms of ritual practice, the more powerful it is and the more functional it is. It's successful. And when you just deter too much away from it, it just becomes either chaotic or unsuccessful. But in terms of how original we must be, I think perhaps it's not that important. It's important to respect tradition. And it's important to make an effort to connect to that origin. But what you end up with, as you said, the Golden Dawn have rewrote a lot of the ritual practices that they found because they couldn't complete them. They couldn't find anything complete, so it's like, okay, well, we're gonna start with this is the core idea, and then we just rewrite the rest. And some of them I think are brilliant and others were terrible. So anytime, right.
Yeah, there have been other scholars and even some today that continue that work then of trying to piece together what is still existent of ancient Egyptian or Greco-Roman magical papyries and translating them and trying to figure out what they were saying, because a lot of that information, I suppose, was passed on through initiation, through word of mouth, and it wasn't even ever written down. So I'm sure that you being brought up within an initiatic system, you've had access to a lot more than the average person would if all you're going off of is what is available in book form.
Oh yeah, definitely. But sometimes these mystery schools or these cults, or if you like, they're closed for a reason. They're exclusive for a reason. And there's come a point, and I love books, but there's come a point where doesn't matter how much you read, doesn't matter how close you get to the original scripture. I've been to places I've worked with scholars, I worked with Egyptologists, actually touching papyri and scrolls that were original. It's a magnificent experience, but it only gets you so far, really.
You say that these mystery schools are exclusive for a reason. This is something that I feel like comes up a lot for me in conversation with people. And there's sort of a debate, an ongoing debate as to whether that is of benefit to the tradition, or if it should be made accessible to benefit a more wide group of people. And I'm kind of curious about what your thoughts are with that, because a lot of these initiatic orders in the past have been very exclusive and very and I just wonder if we're in a different time now, and if perhaps it would benefit people by these teachings being more accessible.
That's an ongoing conversation I'm having constantly with the rest of my family members and friends around me. How much is enough? How much should we share? Should we share at all? How should we open the doors of the temple, obviously symbolically? And are we ready? And are people ready? My personal opinion is that I am really for sharing. I am really for opening the temple doors and putting out information that was considered exclusive in the past. Definitely. But at the same time, I also believe that some will receive that. And, it will instantly fall into place to them, and there will be an attraction to the information. And perhaps a readiness for an initiation at some point. And there will be many who still does not, just simply is not attracted to the information, or attracted but cannot comprehend, which is probably the worst, because it gets to a point where there are minor and major mysteries, and when we go to the major mysteries and the deeper mysteries, it just cannot be diluted, it cannot be made simple, and it often cannot be explained. So it's only so much I can do through word, and it's only so much I can do through imagery and whatever medium we choose, especially now that we cannot actually meet in person with a lot of people. I think it's almost impossible to pass on some of the deeper and major mysteries. So I think it's time for those mystery school doors to be further open, and that information maybe not be so exclusive, but I would personally be still selective, or design a sort of filtration process of who really gets through the door. If you think about ancient Greece, the Eleusinian mysteries, Eleusis was part of the structure. Everyone know that Eleusis exists. Everyone know it was there. Everyone know that it's a mystery school. Everyone knew that there is information available for them, and it was open and available for everyone. Also, as long as they were, I think you had to be 18 plus and a man, something like that. But that was all the criteria. But they still had to be able to process through,
Right.
process through the layers, right? So I think that approach is what might happen in the close future, is that the doors will be open and it's accessible for everyone, but you still need to be able to process through those initiations. And we don't have the world isn't like how it was, mystery schools are not part of the institutions. They don't look at people don't look at them as like, okay, we've got political institutions, education, and then we have mystery schools. It's not there. So because of how hidden it was for how long, so we have to also work with quite a lot of sort of closet spiritualism or closet mysticism, when a lot of people are still feeling really comfortable about hiding, or at least aspect of them hiding, because they don't feel safe. And
yeah, I agree. I think that the system of having the information available and then allowing it to be left to the grade and the person who is endeavoring to pass through the initiations to go through that, so that it's like a school, like there's different levels of advancement based on people's sort of skill level, if that's appropriate to say. I'm very curious because my first encounter, I think, with the Isis mystery school came about through some of the lore and legend that I've heard around Mary Magdalene, that she was an initiate priestess in the Isis cults. And I'm curious about your relationship with Mary Magdalene, and also if you think that that is true or if that is unfounded. And if so, what do you think the relationship is with these Isis cults and, say, Christianity?
Which Mary Magdalene? Because that's not her name, it's a title, isn't it? Yeah, I think I know which one you mean. So my relationship with Mary Magdalene it's a long story, so I'm not even sure I can really go into this. But how I view and look at her really is a figure of history, someone who would have walked a very similar path I have walked in a very different world that we live in now, and maybe looking at her as a sister, as a guide, someone I can have a conversation with on a level that most humans will not understand. But I think the possibility, and I'm bringing my logical and my scholarly brain forward here, the possibility of her being an initiate in an Isis temple is very likely. Just looking at the time, the era, and the location, the biggest Isis cult and the mystery school at the time, there were two near her, one of them being Tantira, which is where the Hathorian and the Isis mysteries were merged by the time she's alive. And both those mysteries were taught in Tantira. Tantira is, we call it Dendera today. So as the city of Nuit was entirely structured around the mystery school teachings of the feminine path, as this feminine wisdom. And the other one would have been in Damascus. So either of those schools could have trained her. And what's specific about these schools is that they only train women of class and royalty. So if they were, and that is evidential also. So if she was, and I believe she was trained in those schools, she was definitely some sort of royalty. And that is actually a common practice from feminine mystery schools all over the globe, that the girls who sort of enter those systems, those mystery school systems, they're often the daughters of the elite kings, kings to be queens, or to a certain level of class that these mystery teachings were relevant to, because they will become women of influence. The Isis mysteries and the Isis tempers didn't see any point in training women who have no influence in the world. Because I don't know how much or the listeners know about that, but the Church of Isis was the single biggest competitor to the Christian church for a long time. Because of their, their connections to royalty and money, and actually just who was involved in the church. So yeah, I think it's very, very likely and possible that she was an initiate in one of these schools. Now, how high and in what form, I don't know. And also we got to look at that, also at the resurrection. Jesus has three Marys around him, and three Mary Magdalenes, and all these women are initiates. And they're present for a reason. They're not present for a sentimental reason. They're present for a ritual reason. And if you look at the Isis and Osiris mysteries, which are also taught through word of mouth, there is always, for the resurrection of Osiris, that's two feminine figures present, and then one masculine figure is present. So it's almost like certain highly initiate practitioners are present for the resurrection to hold a very specific purpose. Yeah, I'd say I think that's my short answer to your question. Do you want me to go deeper into this, or?
Always, but it's okay also to move on. One of the things that we talked about before jumping on this call is sex magic, and I saw that you had advertised for a course that you're teaching about that. Sex magic means a lot of different things to different people, and it's kind of also a bit of like a commercial buzzword within spirituality, and it generally, I think, in kind of new age spiritual circles, means something like how to deepen your sense of pleasure while having sex. I think that's basically a lot of what is being sold in new age communities, and I'm guessing that for you, sex magic means something very different. And I'm curious about what sex magic is to you, as well as what its relationship is with the Isis school that you have been brought up in and are initiated into.
Mm-hmm. So let's define sex magic. Let's attempt to define sex magic, at least. So for me, and this is of course my understanding, my personal opinion, and my studies merged, I've really been involved in different sex magic circles since I was very young. At least 19, maybe 18, 19. So that means different covens, different memberships, different cultures, different structures. And I also grew up in an environment that does practice sex magic. And it's actually just part of an everyday life structure and a ritual life structure. But for me, sex magic has very little to do with sensuality or pleasure itself. I mean, it's obviously part of it, it's relevant, but I look at sex magic as a ritual form to work with our life force energy and to transform, transmute, either internalize and grow our own life force, our ka body, maybe that's a more popular word, or perhaps when it's appropriate, project our energetic force outwardly toward a cause, which is what people now call manifestation, but it's a lot deeper than that. So what I don't see sex magic as a method and way of which we can cultivate pleasure and sexuality and make love in a ritual way. I mean, that sounds great, I think, for a lot of people, and it's got benefits, and I think I'm not discouraging anyone from doing that and making their love making a ritual. But the sex magic I teach is a specific tradition, a specific formula of actually using sexual force to grow and amplify our energy body, and then direct that energy to an appropriate place.
Mm.
So how pleasurable the practice is, obviously orgasmic energy is relevant, so it has to be pleasurable, but the focus is not even on that. It's focus is actually on the method, it's on the practice, and the connection between our orgasmic energy, our heart space, and our mind, because we direct our energy with our thoughts, right? So it's being in this place of ecstasy while still being conscious.
Mm-hmm. Do you utilize any kind of symbols? I know that, for example, the use of sigils is often something that can be used with sex magic to try to manifest a particular outcome. When you say directing the sexual energy towards a thought, how does that work for you? Is it something that you visualize?
The directing, we won't be directing energy toward the thought. The thought is actually just a key. We direct the energy outward to create that thought into reality, right? So the thought is just telling the energy of how it should look, what it should become. But it's actually just bringing a future possible reality to the present through directing that energy. So that's what I mean by that. I do use sigils if the not for myself actually, because I'm a quite visual person, so I am very good with the imageries that are present for me, and I can focus my mind in a way that there's clarity and there's no interference. But sigils are important if you're not a visual person, which is okay, not everyone is. If you need a point of focus to direct the energy to, then sigils are very, very powerful. And imagery that's actually just around you to look at with your eyes is powerful. So, as you know, even art, even very specific art, and I'm sure you can weave your work into that. If it has a certain vibration and you focus on that in the moment of orgasmic release, then you can create that as well and direct what you see outwardly too. So that is how sigils would be also used. Obviously, a sigil needs to be designed for a specific purpose. There's a specific method, and the imagery is actually just there to sort of trick your mind to straight away go to the subconscious mind instead of a conscious mind. So it's a method of bypassing your thoughts, basically. But if you can achieve that moment of clarity when there is no thought and it's just a vision, then you don't need the sigils. So I use sigils with people who are not visual.
I see. Yeah, it's my understanding, as you're saying about the subconscious mind, that the initial theory around sex magic and how it works is that when you enter into an orgasmic state, you're in an altered state of consciousness in which your consciousness is highly impressionable. And so concentrating in that moment through the cultivation of awareness, like you were saying, staying conscious even in ecstasy, and directing your full attention onto a particular outcome that you'd like to see manifested, in that moment you're saturating your subconscious. It fully bypasses the conscious mind, and you're then able to create a momentum for your consciousness to go in a certain direction. Would you say that that's in line with what you teach and what you practice?
Yeah, it's a good explanation. Yeah.
Cool.
It's finding the conscious moment in the unconscious state. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's sort of a liminal awareness in a way, which of course takes practice.
Yeah.
Probably before engaging in sexual practice. And
Absolutely.
from my understanding and experience, sex magic is something that needs to be. There are initial stages that need to be cultivated in order for one to be ready, in order to actually engage in sex magic. For example, awareness of the subtle energies of the body and how they flow through your body, and being present and aware of with that while you're making love, and being able to direct your attention through those different energies and allow them to cycle through you and things like this, as well as deep states of concentration, focus, and visualization, and things like that. So it's probably not as simple as just deciding, okay, we're doing sex magic now, and then you can do that. It takes, probably it takes a lot of initial effort to be able to grow it through a practice you know,
Exactly.
and initiating into
Yeah.
deeper levels of practice in order to be able to do it well.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good definition. So you need the body to be present for the practice. So the sensations, the subtle energies of your physical and your energetic body, they need to communicate. From a woman's perspective, the openness and the softness of her womb and needs to communicate with the subtleness of her energy body. So there needs to be that connection made, which, you know, is already an obstacle for a lot of women. Throughout, you know, for historical reasons. And as applies to men as well, just to communicate with their own energy body and physical body. But actually men are really good at granting their sexual energy naturally. So for them is more about connecting to the subtle energies of their partner's body. And of course, we are now talking about monofocal sex magic, which is step up. So first you just connect to you just work with your own physical body and your own energy body and your presence in your body, actually. And then the presence of your mind and your thoughts and your ideas. Okay. And then how your emotions enter the field and what are they capable of doing whilst you practice like that? And you know, how can they sort of direct or remove you from the presence? It's like being present in an altered state in your body whilst not really being in there. So there's a lot of initiatory practices, as you said, that needs to be in place, and the key word is practice. So nobody just jumps into and tries sex magic, and you know, I mean, they can get lucky and work. It would work if, you know, if it's a purpose chosen, but it's more likely just going to create a lot of turbulent energies in their life and spiral out of control, and almost in a very chaos magic kind of way, when these practices are not in place. So I don't actually teach anyone uninitiated sex magic. So even in what I'm offering in this class, I am actually going to share the history of sex magic, and discuss the Egyptian practices and the Sumerian practices in theory, to create a mental understanding of what are we doing here, and sort of just peel the layers off and the confusion of away from sex magic as well, because it's either looked as a cult ritual or it's looked at a tool of manifestation, which is neither or both, you know. So that's the purpose of my offering, really, is like a very first stage of, okay, what are we doing here, what are we talking about, and also how sacredness of sexuality comes in here, because a lot of people still think that sex magic is having sex with their partner in a candlelit room, which is romantic, but it's magical, but not quite. It doesn't put the K in sex magic.
Right. Well, probably the environment can impact the potency of the ritual as well. If you
everything impacts the potency
everything.
of the ritual. Yeah.
Right. So those candles might help, but maybe also some other embellishments, and there's probably a lot more that goes into it as well.
I mean, if they scented, you know.
Only if they're scented right. Yeah, for sure. So you were saying that sex magic is something that you can do at least at first by yourself and not with a partner. Would you say that it's even more challenging in some ways to do it with a partner than by yourself?
I don't know if it's more challenging. No, it could like actually be easier, but it's more about having your individual awareness of your physical and energy body and your understanding of your emotions and mental state, and what is your point of clarity? What do you need to find that point of clarity? Where is your focus? How your energy works? What are your flows? What are your pitfalls? What are your strengths? You need to sort of come together with those awarenesses first, and then you can really start the work. Because if you don't have that and you come together as a couple and practice sex magic, you just, you know, you risk losing a lot of that flow and that sort of, as the serpent coils upwards, you know, and then suddenly it just like gets tired and drops. So it's just you lose the potency of that coming together if you yourself are not prepared and ready, and that applies to both partners, really. So although I don't think it's harder, I just think a certain sort of premeditative practice is necessary, it's needed. And also, you know, when we're talking about couples, because I work with a lot of couples, also not every lovemaking session has to be sex magic ritual, right? So it's good to draw a line. Otherwise, it could become something very taxing, or it could become almost pressurable. So it's okay to just one day just have kinky sex and next day do a sex magic ritual, or maybe wait a couple days in between, actually, to be precise. But so no, I don't think it's harder. I just think one needs to be ready, both partners needs to be ready. And then of course,
do you think the proficiency of, do you think it's important for both people to be of equal proficiency in order for the ritual to really be effective? Or do you think that there can be one person who's a bit more advanced than the other person? Maybe the other person doesn't have as much experience in magic, meditation, those types of things, to be able to do sex magic effectively, and that could still be powerful?
Yes, it can be powerful. I really think that there's 2 layers to this. One is that practice and experience is powerful, but there are people who just naturally got it anyway. And if they practice a bit more and have experience, that's epic. But there are people who just really naturally are in tune with their energy. And for them, perhaps practicing too much is not that relevant. So in a couple scenario, if one is the magician and the other is not the magician, but just, you know, have a simple talent to sex magic, then it can work beautifully. So I don't actually think both magicians needs to be on the same level. That could actually create some friction and competitiveness. if you bring your spiritual ego into sex magic, which does happen quite often, unfortunately, in this world. So no, I think if we look at couple structures, if one is an experienced magician and the other is not, but sort of carries that natural understanding, that flow, which I don't even know how to describe it. It's something that you see in people that is just there, like their physical and energy body and their thought just move in a very specific direction. Some people call this a past life memory. I'm not even claiming that. I think it's like you can born a singer and you always have a good voice, right? And if you train your voice, you're going to be an extremely good singer. Or you can born without any talent and you can still train and you'll be an okay singer, but you're not going to be a superstar. So it's a little bit like this, really. It's just a talent at a certain level. So I think, if someone's experienced and the other's talented, it works. If one is experienced and the other one is nor experienced nor talented, but teachable, still works. If not, then probably not. And it's also the question of whether we want to practice sex magic in a relationship structure, or do we want a relationship with another person, but practice sex magic with someone else. I don't actually think that every relationship can sustain a healthy ritual relationship structure, if that makes sense. So it's not necessarily beneficial for a relationship to have a constant demand of ritual magic in place. So it's just individual choice of how people want to work with sex magic.
I see. So going back to the history, as you mentioned before, this is interesting to me because we in our culture tend to divorce sex and spirituality, or sex and the sacred. We consider sex to be, the most profane thing, whereas I don't think it was always like that. And probably within the ISIS cults, there was more of an integration with sexuality, spirituality, and the sacred. So what is the history of sex magic, briefly, and when did that schism occur between sexuality and the sacred?
So every ancient culture, from the Celts to the Sumerians to the Egyptians, even the Aztecs, have records of some form of sexual magic practices. And if we're just going back to time and perhaps look at Sumeria, Babylonia, and the Middle East and Egypt, stay in that area, sexuality, sensuality, and magic itself, or ritual magic, was completely one and the same thing. So there was no idea of profanity at all. There was no idea of taboo around any of the sexual expressions, and there was no taboo of nakedness. There was no taboo of touch. And if you look at the mystery schools, and specifically the Isis mysteries, they strongly rooted and anchored in female sexuality. So it's the priestesses who practice sexual magic, and the men come either to witness or to experience. If you look at in the ancient serpent priests and priestess relationships, and that's in every culture, and they one of the oldest original bloodlines, the serpent bloodlines, and the oldest cultures, they present in all these ancient traditions. It's always the female magician, as we call it today, the priestess who practices the art, and the masculine is there to hold space, to witness, to guard the perimeter, depending on the situation, but without judgment. So what happens is those who stand outside witnessing are convinced to judge. And I think this, in Egypt specifically, it started when the Amun-Ra priesthood became really powerful. I think it was them specifically who felt that women should not hold so much power through just being themselves, being in their body, being exuberant and moving energy with just their physical bodies and their thoughts. That's too much and it's too competitive. And so they were the ones who started creating different ideas and ideologies and say it was the gods, right? Because they had direct connection to the gods, and when men have direct connection to the gods instead of women, the story somehow always changes, and somehow women always come out on the worst end, and that you can see that's the repeat in history. And in Sumeria it's the same, women held that sexual power exclusively, and men would come to heal. So there's a lot of traditions that were used for healing, practices, that were used for healing. And at some point in history, in Sumeria, I think it's around really, and Babylon, the fall of Babylon, and then in Sumeria is around when their borders are threatened. So war is at their borders. Then they start to sort of reach for a more masculine power that empowers them into those situations where they can fight, right? They protect their borders. So it was a very human thing. That they take away that power from women, but the only way they can take away this power is through guilt and shame. So I teach about this when I teach about the holy harlot in Babylon, is that the feminine is actually manipulated by guilt and shame. And then when you ingrain guilt and shame into consciousness, and I say feminine, I don't say women, so that's present in the feminine psyche of men also, then that actually removes their ability to connect to their body. And if their body can't connect to their force, then it's a disconnect, and then they no longer can tap in. So historically, if we go back in time, that's probably the first time when you see patriarchy emerge at the same time. And I'm really not, I'm not a feminist. I put that out there now. Like, I don't buy into this, patriarchy is men's fault, because women were sat around and took active part in the growth of that thinking and that sort of understanding too. But that is when you see it in history, and then suddenly the power becomes the main focus of humanity. Whilst with feminine cultures, power isn't the main focus. Experience is the main focus. Love is the main focus. Healing is important, right? Balance is important. So it's a very sort of Virgo Libran qualities. Nourishment and balance is what the feminine really is providing, but also what she cares about. Power is not that relevant. So when we start focusing as humanity start focusing on gain, power, war, destruction, then we remove that connection from that feminine essence, and that affects the temples and the mystery schools too, because something respected in the mystery schools, those priestesses, these female spiritual readers who have these abilities and talents either naturally or trained by, that is how they held power. When we take that away from them, they having to go underground. And then there's the closet spirituality and the sort of high hidden mystic alter ego is developed through the ages after that. And oh, you asked about the ISIS cults and within the cult. The environment I've grown up in is probably the best example. There was no shaming of bodies, ideas. I've not had a woman figure in my life that would tell me ever to feel guilt or shame for how I express my voice, my ideas, and how I move or am in my body. Start there. Granted, I was isolated from the outside world being in a cult, so I wouldn't also access the television and the magazine that was of course present, but it would never come to me. I would never access those things that could, from the outside world, create that guilt, that shame, that disconnection. And I was never told that I wasn't powerful, and I was never told that I was less than. So. And of course, the relationship between mother and father and beloveds and everything is just so present. It's just right in front of you. Nobody's hiding. Nobody's displaying no affection just because the kids are around, right? So those things just don't exist. And growing up in that environment and coming out to the real world was actually a bit of a shock.
I bet. That sounds so beautiful, though. I wish that's how everybody grew up.
It has its shadow side, right? Everything has its shadow side, but I think that part of it perhaps is beautiful because it's liberation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious about your thoughts on lust and what relationship lust could play within sex magic. Do you think that there's a place for lust within sacred sexuality?
Of course. Well, again, we can fall into this terrible mistake of shaming lust. And, again, then we're creating shame and guilt. So if we approach everything from the shame and guilt view, no, I think lust has space in sex magic, and I think it's a quite necessary one as well, because oftentimes the magicians and the practitioners don't know each other that well. So lust is the spark that initiates the connection, and lust is powerful. We know when we are in a state of lust or desire, right? How much power, how much energy moves in our body, in our hearts, in our thoughts. And if you just look at that, that's a very good substance. And I'm talking about energy substance to work with and approach a sex magic ritual with. Now, lust is not always enough. And it's perhaps not something that you want to be stuck in and sustain throughout. And lust transforms into maybe a more solid emotional state. I'm not even going there to say love, but something more sustainable, whether it's a constant desire, whether it's respect, whether it's love, we can go into eros and agape and all those different emotional spaces. But I think lust is important. I think it's the spark. It's the initial fire, and it has to start somewhere. And if you can use that energy and that force in sex magic, then that's just as powerful as any other.
Yeah, I'm glad you say that. I think that lust is a natural part of our expression of our sexuality, and just like every other aspect of our sexuality should be seen as sacred, integral, natural.
Lust is definitely sacred.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm curious also on your thoughts on just kind of how modern culture portrays sexuality and how it's become distorted through things like pornography and things like that. How do you think that people's orientations to sexuality through the dominant Western culture and pornography and things like that, how does that hinder people from being able to access these deeper, more spiritual sides to sex? Does it block people from being able to reach their full potency in regards to practicing sex magic?
It can do, but I don't think it applies to everyone. So I can make general statements, but it really depends on the individual. I think how Western cultures, and that is changing, though we got to admit that a lot of that is changing, like we're doing powerful work, and a lot of wonderful people, women and men, are speaking up on this. But our Western cultures look at sexuality in a very sort of physical, objective, sometimes abusive way, right? But the real problem I see with it is that we're staying in our bodies. Like the idea that we can have sex without our heart being present, we can have sex without our mind being present, without we can just come together and rub our bodies together without the recognition and understanding that there is energy being created there, is what's truly hindering. Now with pornography, I mean, I know sex magicians who are absolutely brilliant, they're powerful, they're in tune, and they still watch porn. It doesn't take away from their power. It's just, they just compartmentalized. They're gonna watch a porn movie and get aroused, and they're gonna be that person who's aroused by what they've seen, and then they're gonna enter a sex magic ritual in full alignment with their energetic field and what is needed for that space. So it doesn't necessarily conflict. It could conflict if you only see sex through the eyes of pornography. And even with pornography, I think it's more about the abusive side of pornography, and especially when it's abusive toward women, that creates a distortion because men are so trained by aggression and war throughout the ages. Like it's in our DNA, and to punish and torture something that is smaller than you is really, it's feeding to this, and to this, it's a mastermind. Basically, it's an energetic mastermind behind you that is actually controlling your psyche. Now that's not to say that, you know, in a sex magic world there is also a space for BDSM, and there's a space for achieving a certain state of consciousness through pain. But it's very precise, it's very intentional, it's very methodical, and it has an esoteric understanding, whilst what you see in porn is obviously very just keeping people in the body and not in the heart and the mind, and the three has to work together. So I think it's hindering to our, you know, human understanding of sexuality, but I don't think it really affects the sex magic world as much.
Right. I mean, I've even known, you know, porn actresses or women that work within sex work that also practice sex magic and have a sacred practice around their sexuality. But like you said, there's a certain compartmentalization or you know, different energies that are at play at different times. One thing though that I think is interesting to call attention to is that seeing that when you are engaged in a sexual act, you're in a sort of trance state that leaves you very open and impressionable. I think that that's something to be aware of when you're consuming pornography or on the internet, where, you know, if you're in this kind of open, suggestible state because you're aroused, whatever you're watching is going to it's going to embed very deeply into your subconscious mind. And if there's any kind of advertisements or whatever else that are around you on that website, like that's going to seep deep into your subconscious. So, you know, I have these ideas of how you could even use pornography to create something that was actually more beneficial for the viewer, knowing how that process works, and take kind of conscious creative action to, put different symbols and things like that would actually could
I see where you're
potentially
going.
impress. Well, I think it could be effective. I don't think it's ever been tried before, but
Has actually, just not on a global scale. Because I know I see where you're going. You want to basically show people pornography because you knew it's going to put them into this aroused state, which arousal instantly puts you into a different state of consciousness and opens certain places of your psyche. Always happens, even if you're just watching porn. Yes. And I can see you sort of putting sigils on the side of the screen and sort of, okay, I'm going to influence your mind now that you're open for me. Yeah, I get it. Right. And obviously the sigils that has the positive and affirmative intentions, rather than the buy this product or buy that product and so on and so forth. But look, we know sex sells, right? And sex sells because of what you just said. And I think that's actually more detrimental than the porn industry is to use our sexuality and sex itself to unlock people's mind, because that's an abuse of personal power. We are abusing every single individual that we relate to this way when they're in that sort of vulnerable state, and then we come in with information and just fill their minds with it. Like that is actually taking a power away, because they're not aware that is actually happening. Yeah. But we do this, society does this with fear as well, right? So it's either sexuality or fear, because fear does the same thing to your mind, just on a much lower vibration. And so you will take actions and respond to things when you're in a state of fear.
Right. And I think that also sex is so sellable because of how repressed the Western world is. Well, it's not just the Western world, but like how repressed people are on the planet in regards to their sexuality. And if it was more open, if it was more normalized, if it was less taboo, there would be less of a demand for it. It's almost like that has been consciously engineered to try to hook people, because they know that people are going to seek liberation and want to engage in things that are taboo. And so that's why things like pornography are so prevalent and so successful on a commercial level. It's because people are so repressed with their sexuality. They don't have access to it, which is unfortunate, because it's so natural and should be incredibly abundant and plentiful.
Absolutely. And if it would be natural, treated as natural and abundant and plentiful, I wouldn't actually mean that it would be all over as well, because it would have a place in our reality, in our society, and it would be, as we said, sacred, right? So it would sustain its sanctity. And we know that when something has sanctity or considered holy, we treat it with that sort of fine attention. As opposed to, because we don't have that fine attention, it's almost like it's everywhere. So, those fears about like, we're repressing sexuality because it's too much and the world would fall to chaos if we wouldn't, is actually not true. It's the opposite, because it would just become so integrated into our reality that it actually wouldn't be such a big thing anymore. Because it's not hidden. We always, so the human mind is incredible, because it will always seek for something that is hidden, right? Something that is not understood fully, that is not experienced fully, and that is what the porn industry latches on, is that I can show you this and I can show you this. You will never really understand it, but you can watch it.
Yeah, it's exploiting that for its own capital gain.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are even cultures now, you don't even have to look to the past, where they have a bit more of an integrated, less repressed sexual aspect. I remember I spent a bit of time with the Shipibo in Peru. I did like a dieta, and my understanding of their culture was that they weren't ashamed of sex or sexuality. It's not like they were having sex all over the place. It wasn't like, a kink club or something like that, but it was just that the parents weren't hiding that from the kids, and it wasn't something that was like a weird, shameful thing. It was just, this is what it is. And, you know, to me, it's very insane that our culture has, for whatever reason, shunned and restrained and been so afraid of something that is just so normal and so natural. It's literally what every person does. It's as normal and natural as breathing is.
Exactly. So it's very similar to the culture I grew up in, that it was never hidden from us. Nothing was really, you know, sub rosa, so to speak. Nothing was really hidden. It was just out in the open. It wasn't overt. It wasn't purposefully pushed into your face, so to speak, but it was there and everyone knows and nobody questioned it. But the other layer to what you're saying is that, you know, we repressed things that we're afraid of. And I think what we said about the history and going back in time, that sexuality is part of the feminine psyche. So even in men, it's part of the feminine energy. And women holding all that sexual power, not over others, but just in general, is actually what is the source of the fear, is what everyone's afraid of, really, is that very specific kind of power, because it's not actually controllable. Only the one who wields it, and that applies to sex magic, can control sexual power. So it requires a huge element of trust and the element of understanding the energy that one's working with. And when that understanding is lacking, then there's fear. This is something I do not understand. It's clearly bigger than me. So I'm going to do my best to repress it. And that you can see even in the sex magic cults, even in the closed circles, that and you know, the Golden Dawn and Aleister Crowley is prime example here, where they repress female sexuality and trying to create sex magic structure that is male pleasure focused, and it didn't really work for them because they kind of missed the point. You know, there was this element, and at the same time, you know, they would chase this feminine figure, the holy harlot, as the emanation of the goddess, but never quite trying to allow her to just be. It was always either a sexual fantasy or it was a form of something to control. Right? It's never about just letting it be. They had to understand her. And, you know, the one thing I teach to every student of mine is feminine wisdom. It's called wisdom for a reason. You cannot understand it with your logical mind. It's something you need to feel and experience. Okay, there's knowledge, which is, yeah, you can gain, you can read about, you can rationalize, and there's wisdom. And the wisdom you will never be able to rationalize. And so this is how I look at sexual energy as well. It's just a certain type of wisdom. And you don't need to understand it. And I think that if we can get society to understand that you don't need to understand it, then maybe there's another door open there for more sharing, for understanding, for the world to change. And, you know, we can really look at this as something natural that is just is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I'm curious, for people that are interested in developing a sex magic practice, which I know a lot of people are, or are at least very intrigued by that idea, but don't know where to start, what's something that our listeners here could do to begin that journey?
There's two things that I would highlight is get to know how your energy body and your physical body communicates, and how does that feel for you, and what emotions are present for you in each moment. Be really present with your body and your energy body at the same time, and find those places where there's a disconnect, because sexual energy can heal that disconnection. And search for love. And when I say search for love, find out what love means to you, what love really is, because you'll get to a point with sexual magic when, you know, this agape, this love will be that power that moves your energy and everything else around you. So if you don't have a healthy definition of love, then eventually you'll hit a block. And perhaps There's lots of books you can read, but it's logical, rational understanding. So just work with your own sexual energy. It's a very good practice to start directing your sexual energy actually down to the earth first and then up the spine, because a lot of people make the mistake of directing sexual energy upwards straight away, which then causes them certain experiences, realizations that's either off-putting or overwhelming. So direct your sexual energy down and give it to the earth, and when you feel grounded, then bring it up. Yeah, that's probably where I would start.
Awesome. Something you said about love, do you think that you can do sex magic in a partnership in which you're not what we would say in love?
Of course, but can you not just be, find what love means to you and be in love? Because that would be a lot more powerful, and it's not limited to, don't find out what love is, but don't associate love with a monogamous container, because that's a structure. That's just what's in the outside. But as long as you have the experience and the understanding of the feeling of love, then you can apply that to anyone, anything for that matter. It's irrelevant who you're practicing with. How about try to apply it to yourself first and have that understanding of love and direct it to yourself, and then and then there's this place for overflow. So yeah, I think of course you can practice sex magic with those you're not in love with, but you'll come to a point where you'll become limited. So history proven many times that magicians who cannot open their hearts eventually will fall off a high horse and crumble. So I think that's within our magical cult, within our occultic circle. This is the key, the solution of these magicians, these sorcerers and mystics actually learning the way to open their hearts.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dea. I'd love to hear more about this training. How can people find information about it, and what's the best way to find you?
So social media is probably the best way to find me. So you can find me at I am Dea Isadora on Instagram, and Priestess Dea or Dea Isadora Durden Robertson on Facebook. My website is priestessdea.com. And all my teachings and classes are actually on the website, and they're usually advertised on Instagram and Facebook also. So how you can sign up is very, very simple. You just DM one of these profiles and you'll be sent a link for the Zoom call. And this is a masterclass, so we will spend 2 hours in an interactive class, so to speak. So I will be asking questions, I will be polling, there will be discussions, and I'll also share a lot more about the history, the mythology, the mysticism of sex magic, and then also the all-in-all understanding and how you can begin to practice as well.
Awesome. And if people are listening to this later on, some months from now, do you think that it'll be available as a pre-recorded thing?
Yes. So everything I do is then goes on my website, and the replay is always available. So all the temple spaces I held, all the masterclasses I taught recently, especially, they're available on the website. And yeah, even on Instagram, if you scroll down, there's links, and it's an availability. It's constantly there. And also, I have my own podcast that Ask the Occultist Next Door. So if you're not ready to purchase some material, but you want a bit more information, then there are some good discussions popping up on that podcast as well to share.
I've really enjoyed listening to it.
I'm glad. Yeah, it was a good one, and I've got a couple of interviews coming out that are, I think, very powerful as well, going forward.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Dea, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day in Avalon. And thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a good day.
Quarantine Sessions podcast with J. Cole.